welcome back to another episode of Gators Gameday Live. I'm Seth Varnadore, joined by Bud Davis. We're going to preview the upcoming Gasparilla Bowl, but the thing that's probably even more on people's mind is Florida's portal strategy and kind of just in a broader sense their roster construction strategy. So we'll talk about that and then some of the guys that they've been targeting in the portal. I think there's some interesting discussions to be had on how you value guys and how guys fit and how things change maybe from situation to situation. But we will start with the Gasparilla Bowl preview here. Florida plays Tulane in Tampa. Tulane was kind of, for most of the year, the best team in the American. They played a couple Power 4 teams, played Kansas State and Oklahoma to varying degrees of success. Pretty tight in the Kansas State game, had a late turnover that kind of turned that one. Played Oklahoma, very relatively close. But lost both those games. Rolled through a bunch of the American, losing to Army. I think if they beat Army, they were kind of right on that line. If Boise would have lost, Tulane probably would have made the playoff. They've seen somewhat of an exodus from their roster. They've been really active on both sides of the transfer portal. There was thought their coach might be leaving for the North Carolina job. Bill Belichick's taking care of that. So, and I'm just a side note, I'm so excited to see what happens in North Carolina. It's very interesting. I tell you one thing, we've been talking on here, on my channel previously, Varnadore Films, when we've talked roster construction and we've talked about the GM model and having kind of two separate staffs almost for recruiting and coaching. And hey, man, if Bill Belichick agrees with us, I feel pretty good about it. So now it may be a total failure, but
long-time listener, Bill Belichick.
Tell him to call in, leave a comment, Bill.
Yeah,
like and subscribe.
We'll have him on one day.
Yeah, we'll have him and Lombardi come on and talk with us about roster construction. But in the meantime, you'll get us. So let's start with the Tulane offense and the Florida defense. This is going to be, both sides have lost a little something. We'll start with the Tulane offense. They had a freshman quarterback, Darren Mensah, who is already gone and is already at Duke. He's already transferred to Duke. They have a good running back. They have a pretty veteran offensive line group and some dynamic receivers. Mario Williams, a lot of Florida fans remember him. I think he's a Plant City kid, right, or kind of right around there, Tampa Bay area kid. So he'll be playing back. Went to Oklahoma. I think, right, Oklahoma, USC, then Tulane, I believe, is what his trajectory was. He's had a really good year. But, Bud, what kind of sticks out are you looking at the Tulane offense? I mean, a lot of green on here.
Ton of green. And, you got to kind of caveat this with their schedule. But even when, I run my opponent adjustment stats, they still come out really high on that. This is a good team. I think what sticks out to me is this is a kind of an unusually successful team for their profile. It's a heavy team with a lot of run game. You see that 12 personnel, plus 16. That's pretty different for college football. And then you're seeing a ton of motion, ton of designed runs, a lot of play action. I mean, this is almost kind of like some of the Florida tendencies on steroids. They're getting a lot of heavy boxes, and they're absolutely crushing them. And you can see the pass game is still very successful. Both the pass and run game, really high success rate. And then they're getting really good EPA throwing the ball. 44% success rate throwing deep. Still throwing deep at a pretty good clip, even with this heavy personnel package. And they're getting really nice EPA per play on those deep balls at 0.46 EPA per play. Tight end targets jump out. They're going 12 personnel. They're hitting the tight ends, only about 10% of their passes, but 53% success rate, 0.53 EPA per play. Those are really good numbers. So look for a heavier offense, a run game, that is able to set up successful deep shots when they get you in these heavy boxes. A lot of the things we kind of talk about Florida trying to do, they do pretty well too.
Yeah, and they've got, like I mentioned, they've got some pretty good guys out there at receiver. The running back Mekhi Hughes is an all-conference guy. I believe he's over 1,000 yards. 1,300 yards this year, 15 touchdowns. So they've got some talented skill guys. Alex Bowman is the tight end, and he only has 18 receptions, but 7 of them have gone for touchdowns. So they kind of really – so he can be a weapon kind of down in the red zone. And Mario Williams, I mentioned already, is a really good player for them. Now, they without Mensah, who was a really, really good player for them, completed 66% of his passes, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 9.5 yards an attempt. Ty Thompson is the backup. He was used quite a bit in like quarterback run game. They'd bring him in and use him there. So he's played a little bit this year, but he's only thrown 11 passes. He's 6 of 11 with 2 touchdowns. So, and a lot of those I imagine a good bit of those are kind of he comes in to run the ball so much that he's got 40 rushing attempts, for example, with 6 touchdowns on the year. He comes to run the ball so much, it's almost like quarterback play action, like Florida used to do with Tebow and that kind of thing, where you kind of use him as the play action guy, then he can pull it out and hit guys down the field. So, or hit guys in the flat, or whatever it is. So he's played, but he's not like dropped back and thrown the ball. He's got 74 yards passing on 6 completions. So
yeah, it does make the job a little bit easier for Florida, but at the same time, this is a bowl game. They've had a little bit more time to get him ready, build out packages for him. So I think we're going to get a pretty good shot from them.
And he was kind of the presumptive starter going into the year. He was a 5-star, I believe, transferred from Oregon, kind of sat behind Bo Nix and got a little bit of playing time there as well. And just Mensah came in and beat him out, and he's had a role in the team. So it's not going to be his first time playing, but I think this is his first start. So, the pretty good all around, but one thing that is kind of interesting, are these sacks and scramble numbers, like, is that really bad?
40% is pretty good. I mean, I think, we're usually something at like a quarter success rate there. So getting that up to 40%, that's pretty good. That means they're scrambling pretty well.
The EPA, is that
seems about right.
Yeah,
so I mean, my guess is these are scrambles. Maybe early.
Mensah
downs.
Was an athletic guy that could take off. So yeah, it's interesting. The profile looks not too dissimilar to Florida in terms of motion usage, personnel usage. So you should see some interesting parallels, I think.
Look at that success rate from the QB designed run game. That's crazy.
And there's a good bit of, I'm sure some of that is with Mensah, but a good bit of that is Ty Thompson coming in, running the ball.
7 out of 10 QB runs are successful. That's wild. And then the gap blocking, I think, jumps out to me. Yeah. Traumatized Florida fan. Always got to worry about a good gap blocking team. Luckily, this season, done really well against it. We'll see how that continues.
Yeah. So Mensah had 60 attempts for 132 yards, but Ty Thompson, we mentioned, had 40 attempts, 243 yards. So he's averaging 6 yards a rush and 6 rushing touchdowns. So he's definitely a big part of the offense there. So I would imagine you see a ton of quarterback run. So get ready for that, and then play action off that. This is Thompson's kind of chance. He's also in the portal, so all 3 of their quarterbacks are in the portal. This is his chance to kind of, a showcase game or whatever you want to call it before he kind of gets in there. So it'll be interesting to see. I know they've got a couple other guys out, but I don't think they've got quite a few in the portal, but I don't think it's been confirmed exactly how many guys will not be playing in the game. Right. So that'll be kind of, and they're not going to come out and tell us before the game, right? So it'll be kind of remain to be seen, how many of these guys are going to kind of hang around. So, so let's go look at the Florida defense now. And this is where we talked about Tulane is losing Mensah. According to some, Florida lost their play caller, but I would imagine it looks pretty much the same with Ron Roberts finally taking over. I think we're of the opinion that it's been Roberts all year. I know there was some kind of back and forth, especially after the bye week once they started playing better. That maybe it's Armstrong, but the statistical profile and the play calling profile you have here matches much more closely with what Roberts has done at Auburn and Baylor previously, and not what Austin Armstrong did. Austin Armstrong was heavy, middle of the field closed. You see here, Florida ended up the year running middle of the field closed less than average.
Yeah, the no blitz numbers are one of the big tells too. The middle of the field open, the low blitz rate, like those were some of the things. Seth, you and I have kind of been saying this whole year, this looks like Roberts, especially like after Texas A&M when we went away from the middle of the field close. We've talked about this before. Statistically, eye test, film, the fact that Austin Armstrong didn't have a play calling sheet, it was pretty clear Roberts was calling the plays, and we took some slack for that. And so it was, some people, I think I've got a comment thread from October where everybody's telling me Armstrong's calling the plays, Armstrong. Napier came out and said it pretty much this week with Armstrong taking the new job. Oh, he gets to call plays again. Roberts has been calling them the whole season. It was kind of nice to be vindicated there. And it was a weird narrative. It just didn't make sense. So,
this is, and just kind of on that note, under Patrick Toney, there was more middle of the field open. When Armstrong came in, he kind of stressed that he likes to do his version of the defense out of a middle of the field closed cover 3 look, right? That's kind of his version of the defense he likes to do out of cover 3, so he can spin safety down, get them involved in the run game. There's also some a lot of post snap rotation, changes the picture for the quarterback, and he likes to do it. His version of the defense, he likes to do much more out of the middle of the field close. So as soon as you saw kind of the middle field open and early in the season, and I don't think he was calling plays, but I think it was more of all right, let's go with what you guys were doing last year early in the season. The middle of the field close numbers were really high. Miami crushed it. Texas A&M
so bad.
Texas A&M killed it. And then
swapped them.
Yeah. So after that game, and then going into Mississippi State, you saw them. That's where the big change happened. And the middle of the field open started to happen a lot more. 2 high safeties, a lot more. I know On3 did an article. I didn't get a chance to look at it, but Roberts talked about some of the things that helped him as a play caller. I know there was some thought that just simplifying things a little bit might have helped. So, maybe there was a ton of post-snap rotation, and guys were rotating and not quite sure because now you got to see it on the move and adjust, whereas maybe I can be a little bit more static, and the rules are easier to communicate and cleaner.
Yeah, we heard word they changed the mic play or two on the defense, the guy who had the mic. And then, the blitz rate cratered. We stopped blitzing as much. That's always going to simplify things. Although we still did a bunch of our sims. So,
and I think you've seen kind of these sacks and scramble numbers go up, especially kind of towards the end of the year, because it feels like those guys up front aren't being asked to kind of 2-gap and read stuff quite as much. And they can you can get in more 4-down presentations and rush the passer a little bit easier, I think. So, whereas when you're kind of in more of the 3-down stuff, a lot of times, especially on the interior, like a Caleb Banks, he maybe have to play a gap and a half, or whereas some like Warren Sapp was like a 1-gap, just go like kind of guy, and that sometimes can be helpful, right? So, whereas like Vince Wilfork was like so big and strong, he could play like 2 gaps or gap and a half, and Des Watson could play 2 gaps just by tilting, getting in like a tilted stance, just functionally take up 2 gaps, but wasn't asked to do that too much. But all right, bud. So besides kind of those middle of the field open splits and the no blitz splits, what sticks out to you about this Florida defense?
Yeah, I think it's an okay defense. I mean, we've talked about a little bit. We've been bailed out with this bend, don't break concept. and that's particularly worked well against LSU. Saw it really pay off against Ole Miss. Some of these more explosive teams that aren't built on efficiency. I think it's going to be tested by a really efficient team like Tulane. I also don't really picture Tulane being able to drive the field running short run like that. So it's kind of weird for me to figure out this matchup. We're an okay designed team versus designed runs. We're okay versus QB scrambles. And I think those are going to be tested, but I do feel like Florida's should be able to contain this Tulane team. And one thing Florida's done well this year is contain running quarterbacks, scrambling quarterbacks. It's been a big improvement this year compared to past seasons. I think we're going to lose some guys that have been a big part of that. Pyburn, Searcy, those have been big of that, kind of edge F player that gets asked to do a lot of things, sometimes QB spy, sometimes drop into coverage, sometimes rush the passer. It's not really a one-dimensional role where people often just look at this pass rush stat. But I do think it's a good chance for a guy like McCray to get some good snaps there. Gums to showcase, really his value heading into next season. So I'm not that worried, but there's always a little bit concerned when you lose key pieces.
The things I think to look for, right, just based on Tulane, success rate against 12 personnel, and then this is something that's kind of come, in these bend but don't break, especially kind of late in the year, is the running game success rate allowed.
Yeah.
Is this, and it seems like it is this the strategy to let people run the ball? Don't give up explosive plays. Let people slowly move it down the field, and then, tighten up in the red zone, or tighten up and then get a couple negatives in the drive without points or by giving up field goals. It seems like against LSU and Ole Miss that was kind of the strategy. I don't think that is a real long-term successful strategy. I think with luck you could probably be okay, but elite strategy, that it's not it, but it's a winning one as of late.
And we have played teams with much different profiles than that, like UCF. That was a very good rushing team that we absolutely handled up front. So Florida can do it, and this is where it's we actually have faith in our play caller. He's adapted throughout the year against the opponent with good game plans. So I think they should have a good game plan. I think Florida has the pieces to contain a very good Tulane offense. I'm really curious, maybe we're rotating a lot more heavily from guys who are moving on next year, whether it's the portal or the pros or just graduating. So we might see a lot of young guys. That wouldn't surprise me if Tulane is able to run on those guys, because you do benefit pretty significantly from age and development, especially in the front seven.
Yeah, and they've got some older guys up front on the offensive line. Now, against their two Power 5 opponents, they averaged 3.5 yards a rush on 71 rushes. They rated 255 yards. So hopefully you're hoping kind of even with their kind of them having some older guys there.
The gap numbers make me feel good.
Yeah, so you're hoping that you can kind of boss it around up front a little bit, and if you can do that, I think if you can get guy starting his first game that's had chances, that's been recruited over several times now. So this will be the second staff that's told him, hey, you might want to move on. I think if you can get that guy in the third and longs, it'll be a good night for you. But we'll see if they can do it. Now, on the other side of the ball, let's start with the Tulane defense, because we'll start with the Florida offense. Might as well. So Florida offense, led by DJ Lagway, we got some good news with some guys saying they're coming back. And I don't think Florida's had 0 opt-outs besides a couple of the transfer guys, right? Yeah. It seems like everybody is invested and wants to play. But looking back on this kind of year in totality, what really stands out to you?
I think what you just said is like one of the big takeaways is this team didn't have a lot of quit in them. This is a team that is fully bought in to what Billy Napier is selling and had a lot of guts and tried through when we were questioning whether this was the right path and whether Billy was the guy. And it never seemed like the team questioned that and has been fully bought in, and seeing them still bought in during the bowl game is really crazy and pretty unusual for college football. So that's something that stands out probably more than any single stat. Because we have a pretty good statistic profile. There's nothing really crazy that it's like, man, we do that better than anybody in the country.
Yeah, the throwing numbers are pretty good. The running numbers have gotten so much better. The early in the year they were pretty abysmal, and even the EPA, because there were some fumbles in there that were kind of just getting crushed. But the running game has made a strong rebound here late in the year, so that's good to see. The one thing that I guess doesn't concern me, but it could be fun or it could make for a tighter game. So just look at the Florida man numbers here. Success rate, not great. EPA, not great. So let's look at the Tulane defense real quick. And this is kind of, I guess, not a spot for concern, but this is something we saw against Florida State a little bit. So Tulane, here's their defensive, pretty good. Interesting, not a ton of light boxes. So I don't think Florida's going to see many. So a lot more 6 and 7. Now here's, I wonder how much, maybe, I don't know if that's enough, but they played both Navy and Army this year.
Oh.
So.
That's crazy. So they must go, yeah, I bet that's it.
So they played both the Navy and Army this year. So take that for what it's worth. But man, they've run a little bit more man than average, middle of the field closed, which we've said the offense is basically, the passing game is designed for middle of the field closed, right? Yeah. Billy wants to run at you. If you got 2 safeties, you bring a safety in the box. Now this is where kind of the passing game opens up. But his strategies against man can be really hit or miss. We saw this against Florida State. They like to, and it's one way to attack it, but they like to take shots against man coverage. So if you hit them, you could blow a game wide open. So I think there's if Tulane sticks with this much man, I think there's a kind of a wide variance of where this game could go for Florida offensively. It could be like parts of the Florida State game where it feels like the offense is sputtering because you're not hitting throws against man coverage, or if you win a few of those,
turns into South Carolina,
like Florida's done, like Badger against LSU, or those kind of games where he had man coverage, he'd win. Then it starts to really open up. So that'll be kind of the thing I'm watching for. How much man is Tulane going to play? And how much middle of the field close? I would think they play a lot of middle of the field close because just to have an extra hat for the run game. But I don't know. Do you think they're going to play this much man?
I expect, I think they're going to stick with what they've done, and they've done it well. You look, those numbers are very green. This is what they do the most because it works a lot. They've found their good tendencies, and then they lean on them. They're not a heavy blitz team. So they're bringing guys out and then bringing them guys up to help in the run game with the middle of the field closed, but then they're getting them back quick into coverage as well. I do think we're going to see a lot of man, and I'm hoping it looks more like South Carolina last year versus FSU this year. But we'll kind of see. Yeah, we'll kind of see. I mean, DJ having some time to get healthy, I think absolutely helps things.
Just kind of looking through real quick, it looks like they've got a few defensive guys in the portal. Parker Peterson's rated an 88 transfer. Matthew Fobbs White is an edge. Looks like he's already committed. I'm not sure how much he played this year, but so there are a few portal guys. So I think they might be missing a couple guys up front, which if that's the case and those guys were major contributors, that'd make you feel pretty good about being able to run the football. So just like it is every week, I think if Florida can run the ball, they'll be fine. The question is, how much man are you going to get? And if you can hit the shots against it, then I think you could really blow the game wide open. And this is kind of one where, similar to Florida State, I mean, Tulane's a lot better than Florida State, but just kind of in terms of, I don't think they want to throw the ball a ton with this quarterback. So if you can kind of get up early and and take away the running game a little bit, then I think that's where you can get to kind of a big number. But if you let them hang around, they're pretty good. So,
yeah, and I think what just a great sentence that you just said. Tulane's a lot better than Florida State, man. We're living in good times for that.
Academically, on the football field,
location.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man.
So what's your expectation? I kind of just to wrap up there. Offense. So just to wrap up, offensively, Tulane not too dissimilar to Florida in terms of personnel, using motion, that kind of thing. But missing their starting quarterback, so probably expected a heavy dose of run with their running quarterback in. And then on the other side of the ball, can Florida run the ball? How much man does Tulane play? If they do, can Florida hit those shots that they seem to really like to take against man coverage?
Yeah, and I feel good about Florida here. I think having time for Florida to get healthy, seeing how bought in the team is, Tulane with some transfers, I think a lot of this is saying this is working in Florida's favor. That being said, this is a good Tulane team we're playing. So you never know with bowl games. They're pretty weird. But I think Florida should win this one and get to 8 wins, which is awesome.
And they have a really good coach. Like Summerall's, really well thought of as a coach. So I'd imagine he'll have the team prepared. Now, Tulane, on kind of both sides of it, we've talked about guys going out, but they've been pretty active on guys coming in as well in the transfer portal. So it's a beautiful transition to move into kind of roster construction. That's something we really wanted to talk about. Do you want to start with kind of you want me to throw up the kind of where Florida ended up in kind of the recruiting cycle so far and kind of the expected value?
Yeah, let's throw up the high school recruiting expected value. All right, so this is, we look at draft data to figure out what the actual value is. There's no better evaluator on how good a college football player is than the NFL. There are 32 teams with huge staffs who spend lots of money and time to figure out how valuable players are. We can look at relationships between how drafting and recruit rankings go together to get at a really clear relationship between how much a recruit is worth. This is a good measure of how valuable they are on the field. And it's also correlating really well with on-field results. And Florida ended up with the number 12 class. We're, between Notre Dame and USC, those are pretty decent programs to be around. We have an expected value around 180. That doesn't move the needle at all, really, for our odds to win a title. We're kind of out of it. We're in this, third tier where your shot is basically 1 in 20. We're behind a lot of other SEC programs. I think we're 8th in the SEC. So this is disappointing.
That's the real issue, right? Like, USC 13th. Okay, you're 4th in the Big Ten. Cool. Florida is 9th. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You're 8th in the SEC, right? And with Ole Miss right there, and then they're really attacking the portal, and Oklahoma's right there. So you're not getting any you're not getting a leg up on anybody, right?
No, not at all. Like, if I tell you the difference between LSU and Florida is greater than the difference between Florida and Georgia Tech, that should concern you, and it does, But this was a good turnaround for Billy. Florida's class was, in the 50s at the midpoint of the season, and they really were able to turn this around and flip some guys and fill out this class with some pretty decent depth pieces. But there's not that many guys on this roster that have the high expected value. These are kind of just depth guys, depth pieces for a lot of teams, and you're hoping to roll the dice on a few of these and hit jackpots, like kind of like how Jaden Ball turned out, or even guys like Pyburn, not a highly rated recruit, a decently rated recruit, and you hit on him and he turned into a quality starting SEC caliber guy. And those are valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to see. I can try to zoom in here just so it's easier for people to see this. But I think the interesting thing is when you look at, and I think this kind of speaks to what you're talking about. When you look at like the top teams here, right? Each bar represents kind of one player, right? Each kind of. So look at so I'm assuming the top rated guy is to the left here, taking up a certain. So you can kind of see where Florida's at in terms of their top rated guy, their top rated recruit. And there's a lot of like decently sized values here. But then you look at Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio. Like look at Michigan. That's the Bryce Underwood effect, right?
Yeah.
But so that's kind of these big time top of the ticket players really drive these ratings, right? And that's been the real missing thing in the Billy Napier. But outside of last year, probably was you had the two mainline guys and then not as much behind them.
Yep.
And McCray and Lagway. But that's kind of been what's missing most, is that getting those big marquee names at the top and then filling the class out after that, right?
Yeah, and I think Lagway is a great example of why you need those pieces, because as a true freshman, he was able to save these coaches' jobs. That these guys have immense value, and it's okay to say that. And I think we need to think about this. And I think where me is kind of one of the disconnects a little bit is there's been a paradigm shift in college football with the portal, and unlimited free agency and NIL, where there's really not much value to stacking depth, because if you hit on a guy and he's elite, that's great. You have to pay him next year. And if you don't have your budget set up for that, you're going to let him walk and he's going to go play for somebody else. And so you have to have a plan to be able to pay these elite guys, whether you hit on them from a dice roll, or you're getting from the portal, or you're getting them from high school recruiting. You have to figure out a way to acquire the elite talent and be okay with figuring out how to pay for the elite talent and not overpay for talent that doesn't get you to that next level, which is competing for championships.
And I think that kind of, the approach that it seems to be right. And I think one of the big things going on now with the portal, with NIL, with upcoming possible, like where it turns into a salary cap type, league, is cost uncertainty. The player at the college level has more power than an NFL player, right? Bill Belichick got asked about it. How is it similar? How's it different? And Bill Belichick goes, well, in the NFL, these guys are on like 3-year contracts. In the college football, it's a 1-year contract every year. So that cost uncertainty, I think, is a real big issue for a lot of programs. But the way you can get some cost certainty, right, is spending on elite guys.
Yes.
Because okay, I'm going to have to pay top dollar, but I'm going to get a lot of value out of these guys. And my costs are probably going to be pretty consistent over the period. I know I'm going to have to pay up. Whereas a guy like you mentioned, Jaden Ball, it's great to go out and find him. And I think if you're this staff, this strategy should be really appealing to you, because they've done a good job of going out and identifying players that can come in and play early that maybe weren't the top tier recruit guys. Like even Trey Wilson wasn't like, an all everything guy. I don't believe, like he wasn't, a scrub, but he wasn't like, top 5, Jaden Ball this year. But the problem with those guys, right, is they have one great year. Depending on who it is, they may say, hey, you know what? We need to up the bag here.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, in some ways, Florida has a low risk profile. We take a lot of guys that are expected to have a value above replacement. And that's fine. They have a value that's, 1 to 2 times above replacement, which I put replacement at the top number 300 recruit. We have a lot of guys that are better than that. The problem is they're only, 1 to 2 times better. And you need guys that are 10 times better, 20 times better. I think Lagway's valued 20 times better, roughly. 5 times better. You need to get those guys, and you can do it from high school recruiting. You can do it from the portal. And when you start doing the math of like, okay, well, how do you pay for a guy that's worth 20x? That means you have to let go a lot of these guys that you're potentially paying to be worth double the value. So it's like having a portfolio where your eggs are only in a few baskets, but you have a higher average return from doing that than if you put your eggs in a lot of basket with low probability of success. It's like having a S&P 500 index fund versus a bunch of penny stocks. Like, we don't want to play the penny stock game because with the portal and how it works, even if you hit on a penny stock, somebody else can buy it, and you don't get to sell it at the high value and get anything in return.
Yeah,
so.
I thought this chart you shared is a really good kind of illustration of why it's important to have like how to kind of think about your spending in a different way, right? Can you kind of walk us through this and what it means in terms of roster construction? Because I think it's really it's kind of the antithesis somewhat of what most have thought for a long time, and it seems kind of how Florida is built, with a lot of guys being good players, but not the tippy top elite guys.
Yeah, so this is a chart that's derived from Sports Info Solution data. They have a kind of a proprietary point saved metric that is essentially a WAR value for every player, across different positions, where you're supposed to be able to compare 1-to-1. It works pretty good. I think it's really interesting. And what I did here is I took every player on every team. I don't know if I have the years on here. I did this, I think. So it's probably like 2016, 2022, something like that. Every P5 team took all their players, looked at the WAR of each player, and then looked at, on a per player basis, was WAR distributed kind of evenly across the roster, or was it concentrated in just a few players? And if so, how many? Because it didn't make sense for it to be evenly distributed, because you only play 22 guys. You only have 22 starters, but you have 85 guys on the team. And what you see is almost all of it is in just a few guys, 5 or 10 guys. That's almost all of your WAR is coming just from a few 5 to 10 key playmakers. And really, by the time you get to your 40th guy, after that, those guys aren't contributing anything. This is only for one season, so that's important to keep in mind. This is just for a single year. So you have this exponential function where all of your on-field value is coming from, 10 to 15 guys. And you should probably pay to reflect that. Your pay function on a given season should probably reflect this, with unlimited transfers and no long-term contracts. The fact that you're going to have to pay guys even if you hit on them, this is kind of how, I don't think you have to follow this exact function. I think I tweeted something today where I would break it out into tiers. I think that makes it a little simpler. But you shouldn't be paying, 80 guys on your roster to be 2 times above replacement. That's a good way to get a straight line here, or a slightly sloped line. You don't want that. You want something that's an exponential that drops off, where you're paying a few guys that are NFL quality. Because we see similar functions with recruiting expected value, where all the value is concentrated in just a few guys. We're seeing it here in this other metric of on-field value. This is unrelated to the draft. This is just essentially a WAR metric. You can see it there. You can look at, I've looked at this at how, the number of NFL quality players turns into points per game. And really, you need 15 dudes. You need 15 NFL quality dudes if you want to compete for anything. And you got to figure out how to pay for 15 NFL quality dudes in a really competitive NIL market that's only going to get more competitive when rev share starts. And I don't have faith that Florida has a plan to do that. I think we're probably playing way too many guys that 200, 300,000 a year to essentially be depth pieces. And then if it does look like they're promising, for them to ask for 400, 500K and us really not have the budget to set that up. And so we kind of just paid for development pieces like Pyburn. He's a guy you gave a third of your snaps to at edge. You paid a fair bit, actually, probably 200, 300K for a third of your snaps there. And then he's actually going to go do most of his probably college career snaps at a different SEC school.
That
you play. And I'm fine with letting the Pyburns of the world walk because I don't think he's NFL quality, but it's just an example of the non-value of paying for that depth.
Yeah. And this is what's really interesting about this to me is, so when I was coaching at the Division II level, you get 36 full scholarships. You can break them up any way you want.
Mm-hmm.
My thought was like, why don't we give 30 full scholarships and just get 30 really good players? And then whatever the 6 other ones, break them up however you want. And then at that level, you get a lot of walk-ons. But that was kind of like, that was my thought when it came to like, does anybody just go and say, hey, you know what? We're going to full scholarship 30 really good players. Since they won't have to pay anything, it'll be we can maybe recruit above our head a little bit. And seeing this, it makes me think I'm vindicated here. So, but I do, it is interesting. And then to kind of go with this, you put this out as well in terms of kind of how you would kind of pay for things. Or how you kind of distribute the payment. I think can
you zoom in?
Just work with this. I think understanding this and then also understanding what are my development positions. If you can understand both those things, if you kind of hold those in your head both simultaneously, that, okay, I need to pay top dollar for this many guys at the top, and then I can also have some development positions like offensive line. Okay, well, maybe I need to pay more guys there because it's a development position or whatever. I think that's kind of the optimal way to get at it. So, all right, so you tweeted this out, and I thought it was really interesting kind of way to look at things. So go ahead and talk us through this.
Yeah, so this was, I think, Hal Lewis posted, who's one of the Florida boosters. You'll see him active. He's not active on Twitter anymore, but he's all over the boards. You should know Hal if you're a Florida follower. He posted, about how tough it was to make a $20 million budget, just as a thought exercise. That doesn't mean Florida has $20 million or anything like that, but he posted as a thought exercise. I was like, I feel like I could do it. And I'll give Hal credit. It's actually pretty eye-opening, and I suggest people do it. You can use this as a start. But this is how I think I would do it. And it follows tiers, but it kind of tries to mimic that exponential relationship where you end up paying top dollar for about 15 NFL quality guys. You round out your starters with pretty good paychecks. And then how I did it, initially assumed $100,000 as a base pay. I think what I do now, somebody suggested this on Twitter, I don't have it on here, is if you can cut out an 11th tier and pay, 18, 20 guys $50K, then you're freeing up more. I think you can get 5 guys at the 5 and 6 tier, 8 guys at the 7 and 8. And that frees you up a little bit more to give you a couple more NFL quality guys. So then you're at 17 guys at that 400K and above. That should be a pretty competitive roster. So, pay Lagway $2 million, pay, ideally it would be an offensive tackle that's NFL quality and a cornerback one that's offensive, that's NFL worthy. Pay them $1 million each. You just locked up the 3 most important positions in college football. You're paying them a high top dollar salary, so they should be happy and you're keeping them. Then you take $750K, give it to your next 2 best NFL guys, so your Slaughters and your Banks. $750K, that should be pretty competitive. $600K for your next 2 best guys. I don't think. Let me see if I can figure out who I would give that to. I tried to do it for the roster. So, that's your Harris, and then I'd put that on for Florida this year. I'd put that on a cornerback out of the portal. $600K, get me a cornerback out of the portal. Then fill out $500, $400K. Then you're starting to look at, 5 guys. Fill out your starters. Fill out your guys that you feel good about, that have high potential to play on Sundays, even if they're not clear NFL guys. Fill that out. You have really high quality SEC starters. And $400, $500K, you should be able to afford it there. And then you give it your depth pieces at that 200 to 300 range, which is a competitive salary, but you're probably not getting top-end depth pieces there. I think this is where Florida probably pays way too many guys. I think we've got development guys that are making $200K, $300K. And that's where I think Florida has made a mistake. And I had a tweet on this where, I compared it to mid-range NBA jump shots, which nobody does anymore. They used to when I grew up watching NBA. But then you figured out there's no value in being in this middle ground, right? And I think that's
there's value for 2 guys because they are exceptional at hitting those shots.
Yeah.
So you got to hit a lot more shots than average.
Yeah, I mean, you got to break the mold. And get lucky. And I don't want to be the team that relies on luck. I want to strategize this, especially a team like Florida that is out of that top recruiting tier. We're not able to rely on high school recruiting, so we have to rely on something else. And whether that's NIL fundraising or NIL spending, or coaching or scheme. We have to have something if we're not going to do it via high school recruiting. I think there are other paths, but I think Florida's not doing it in high school recruiting. I don't think we're doing it here because we're one of the few teams that it's a high-quality NFL P5 team that doesn't have a GM somehow. Mark Robinson left early in the year to go to UGA, and we've heard months and months and months Florida's going to bring a GM. Florida's going to bring a GM. If you don't get a GM for early signing day in the portal period, there's no point in bringing in a GM. Just wait till next year.
No. Yeah, Gators Gameday is ready to step up and function as a dual GM if called upon. Here's an interesting note. So I also own and kind of run a USF site. There's somebody in our Discord attached to the site that is an actual sports agent, and he's an actual NIL agent. So he'll come in sometimes and kind of say some figures. So I was kind of searching back through just to kind of look on your stuff. Quarterbacks are making the most.
Yeah.
He's saying kind of the average Power 5 starter, P4 starter is making $500K typically. Yeah. And then just to kind of put some of these numbers in perspective, and then linemen. He said this is a quote from him, trench monsters and quarterbacks are making the bag $500K to $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So that's if
that's true, then pay for cornerbacks, get some good value there, save the money, put heavier money, bump where I had my cornerback one at $1 million, pay him $600 if you can get away with it.
Yeah.
And get those trench guys.
So I think that's kind of, I think this approach is definitely, and you've seen this in some places where they do it by, I think Pitt was one where they started doing it this way. When Pitt was going 7-0 and they were getting all the nice stories written about them, and I follow Pitt because played for Kerwin, so big fan of Cade and Kerwin. So I was following Pitt kind of because of Cade. But they talked about they totally restructured the NIL. First of all, the guy in the collective has a former NFL front office guy, like helping them decide how much and who gets paid. So the Pitt collective has a GM basically with NFL experience. That's neither here nor there. But they started tiering it kind of. Guys that had done nothing, they're not paying any. They're paying very little. Guys that have proven themselves, they kind of went with 3 tiers. Guys that have proven themselves on the field are the guys they pay the most, and they're willing to kind of every year, if a guy has a great year, they'll renegotiate and kind of pay him. But it goes the other way too. They'll take money away from guys and be like, hey, you can stay. But like you've got to be, that's kind of how it has to be. I think I know there was I believe there were reports out there, especially early, that like Billy kind of wanted everybody in the roster to be getting paid.
Yeah.
Which
that's why when I did this, I did the 100,000 base pay as the starting block,
Which I guess the question will be going forward is, the problem is we're going to get some type of cap on spending without a real one because there's all these loopholes that are coming in. You sent me one today, like the states could technically use money
LSU's going to pay players to prevent smoking, and that's going to not count against the cap.
You'll be shocked to know LSU is finding shady ways to pay players.
Yeah.
It's never happened before. But so there's going to be all kinds of circumventing of the cap if there is a cap with the revenue sharing money. But, do you think it's going to be where everybody gets a cut of the revenue sharing? Or is that something that is going to be legislated? You think that, hey, well, all players get an equal cut of that? Or is it going to be, it's up to you to decide, which I think a salary cap, like a hard cap in college football, would be wild. So, and super fun. I think it would make the game much. I mean, we've already seen the transfer portal kind of smooth out kind of some of these talents, the talent gap a little bit. A salary cap would really go the next step, right?
And then, I mean, if it works out where they're giving each school, all right, say they give every SEC school, $15, $17, $18 million in rev share to spend on their football players. Vandy wasn't previously able to raise 15, 17 in NIL. Now, all of a sudden, if Vandy wants to do the strategy I just put out, they can pay 16 guys $1 million. Yeah. They can do your strategy, Seth, except with their rev share.
Yeah.
And they can pay, 18 guys $1 million and then pay everybody else a scholarship. And if they decide to do that, all of a sudden Vandy's offering your guy $1 million. Do you have a plan to be able to keep him?
Yeah.
It's not going to be, oh, well, we're paying him 200, 300. And he, we've already seen Pyburn was a grown Gator, a Jacksonville guy. Gator, blood orange and blue, was so pumped to come here. He's not taking a $200K pay cut to stay in the orange and blue. Like, these guys aren't giving out discounts. I don't expect them to. I wouldn't take a $200K pay cut, for colors. Like,
get a raise.
Yeah, like, I mean, people are going to say it's not loyal. I get that, but if we don't have long-term contracts and we don't have a salary cap, you have to have a good plan, and I don't think Florida has a good plan.
Who's going to be? Tough. I guess who's going to be the first person to who's going to be the first collective, or we might be kind of getting away from this now, but to overpay to lock somebody up for multiple years.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of these guys have agents, so just similar to anything. Like if you want to delay free agency, you're going to have to pay a little bit more for it.
Oh yeah,
right. Like
coaching buyouts, except for players.
I think if you were really with it, you'd go to a guy, and you see Jaden Ball early in camp, and you're like, okay, he's going to play a lot for us this year. Maybe you go to his representatives and say, hey, we want to pay him more. We'll give him some money up front. We'd like to sign him for next season as well. Yeah. What do we need to do to get that done? And you could give them a nice increase in pay, before they can actually hit the open market. So by the time, kind of like what the Rays did this, like Evan Longoria. Before he ever played a game, they gave him like a big, huge contract. But they knew kind of by the time he hit the end of the towards the end of the contract, what he'd be making would be kind of minimal compared to what a guy with his value kind of makes.
I think you can do it like that. I also think you can make it, have weird vesting things that keep guys from hitting the portal. Your paycheck doesn't vest until, January 9th. Oh, what a coincidence. That's after the portal period.
And you've got to pay a premium for that, because anybody that has an agent's just going to be like, they're going to say, oh, you're just doing that to hold it, so it'll be wild. Now, we did want to talk about one guy in particular here. So Florida hasn't had a ton of, they've had a few visitors, but one kind of, I would say, stirred some people up. But the big thing is a lot of Florida fans are looking for, with obvious, right, when you have a stud quarterback, you're losing a couple of your top receivers, you're looking for a receiver to replace the ones you've lost, and you've lost some pretty good ones. So you think with Lagway, the way he likes to play, getting a guy that can, they can come in as an elite receiver would be money well spent. These are some of the guys early in the portal, and you put some numbers on them in terms of yards per route run, which explain why that is such a good metric.
Yeah, it's probably, so one, it's a sticky stat. So NFL guys NFL teams, when they're looking who to draft for college football wide receivers, they like to go to yards per route run because it translates really well from college to the NFL. Same line of thinking for an SEC team potentially looking to acquire a wide receiver who might not have played at an SEC quality opponent. You can still look at yards per route run and feel pretty confident that stat is going to translate. So that's the best reason, is it's a sticky stat. There's high correlation between what a receiver is going to do in college and what they're going to do in the pros. Similarly, we expect that it's going to do the same thing in college and translate from a lower level, maybe G5 program, to like an SEC program. Then the second reason is it's the best pure metric of a receiver's production and their value. So, guys can get yards a lot of different ways. Maybe they can be short yard guys who get a lot of yak. They get short yards, get a catch. They get a bunch of yak after the catch. But guess what? That's a lot of value. Maybe they catch a lot of receptions for a short amount of yards. That adds up. That has good value. Or maybe they're a deep threat. They don't catch as many balls, but when they do, it goes really far. And so just taking the yards and dividing it by the number of routes gives you a good value to, evenly weight deep threat guys, yak guys, short yarded possession receiver guys in a way that values all of them. Because really all you care about as production is their ability to help you move down the field. And so I like looking at it, and generally we've tried to aim above 2, I think is kind of my threshold. I want to see about 2 yards per route run. That's a pretty good level to measure at. And with how many receivers enter the portal, you should be able to hit it if you're trying to get a starter quality guy. Pearsall was a guy. He clearly, had high yards per route run. We were really excited to get him. Badger, crazy yards per route run. He was like 2.5, 2.6. We were so happy about that. DK, he was one, not great 2023 numbers, but then you hear, oh, he was hurt. Go look at his 2022 numbers when he played with Mertz. 2.4 yards per route run on a full healthy year. So you could feel good about him. So they put this together for some of the guys that initially entered the portal, like Virgil and Sowell. those were two guys that were interested in Florida potentially. They were about 2.3 yards per out run. Feel good about both of those. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get them or maybe any of the guys on this initial list.
I think Nick Anderson's gone. CJ Daniels is also committed, right? Hasn't he? Caleb Odom just committed to Ole Miss, like as we're on the show here. So yeah, there's a lot of these guys. There's a lot of these guys that I think Eric Rivers has not made a commitment yet. He would be an interesting one.
Yeah.
But there's another one that came on campus that has some traits, and I think we kind of wanted to talk about him just in terms of. I think it's like the perfect guy for what we want to do here, kind of on what our goal on this show is, right? So I'll throw up your tweet with a little concerned emoji here. Michael Sturdivant started his career at Cal, I believe, transferred to UCLA.
Yep.
Interesting player. Now, you kind of look at his yards per route run, which, you were kind of explaining it, but it's a great stat. I think it can show, to me, it shows a couple of things, right? Who's an accumulator, like who's just, I catch I get a lot of short throws. I'm just accumulating yards. I'm not really making a difference. And then also like, if it's really low, either, you're not getting targeted a lot. If it's, if it's really low, you're not like the alpha on your team, most likely, which I think can be a little scary. Like, okay, so you're kind of a role player,
right?
At a school that's doesn't have as much talent as Florida from a lot of those guys, right? So what makes you think you're going to come here and be a contributor, right? So, I think it definitely, to me, it shows a little bit of like what's your role too. So then if you tell me, oh well, he was really an integral part of the offense, then it's like, okay, well then he's not very good. If you're telling me he was the main guy and they designed stuff for him and he's averaging very low yards per route run, right? So I think it's a really, in those terms, it's a really good stat as well. But old Mr. J. Michael Sturdivant here, his yards per route run has gone down every season. So this was somewhat concerning to you that he seemed to be a pretty highly sought after target. I believe he's come on campus at Florida. What was kind of your kind of concern here? Is it just kind of purely that?
Well, my concern is not taking a flyer on a guy who has bad stats. My concern is, we talked about how we budget Florida's NIL, and I said I'd spend $600K on a really high quality wide receiver. I'm not spending $300K on J. Michael Sturdivant. There's a lot of guys with traits. We've had Marcus Burke on Jaquez Frazier's. We've had we've had Khalil Jackson. We've had a lot of guys with traits in Florida's wide receiver room, and we've talked about the show over and over. Like, we're getting no production from these guys. They're essentially a waste of a scholarship. When they run routes, Florida does worse. We should stop having them run routes. And I was worried this was in that vein, where Florida could spend $400K to bring in a guy who is tall and fast and not a good wide receiver.
Yeah, so interesting kind of with him, like tall, he's 6'2", 6'3". Speed, he ran a 10.4 900 meters. So like that's like
fast.
Really fast, right? So, since kind of Randy Moss, everyone wants that tall, fast guy. So he fits the bill there. Ran a 10.49 in high school. Really good track athlete, right? But his production is not very good. But so I went and kind of watched because, there's some, I saw some of the responses to Bud were,
oh man,
watch the film, nerd.
I like actually.
type, you're not a ball knower, these types of things. So I wanted to watch the film. And so what I saw, and I think there's a difference between being really fast and being really explosive too, right? Like there's different ways to be explosive without being 10-4, 900 meters guy. But as soon as I started watching him, I'm watching his highlights and I'm like, man, this guy looks like Justin Shorter. That's the first guy that popped in my head. You kind of get a taller guy that has got some straight line speed, but a little stiff. I didn't watch it a lot, so take it with a grain of salt. I watched a highlight tape, so I haven't watched a lot of this guy, but I watched 4 minutes, so I can make a really educated opinion. So, but to me, he looked like Justin Shorter, a guy that's kind of more straight line, vertically explosive, not a ton of like wiggle, not a ton of, he's not Trey Wilson, right?
Right.
So to me, I saw him and I thought, oh, he looks just like Justin Shorter to me. So I wanted to go back. Actually, JP Gator and from Gator Dave's Discord, he found these because we were kind of talking a little bit, and I thought, yeah, this guy kind of reminds me of Justin Shorter. I wonder what his kind of yards per route run were before Napier got there, because he kind of had been middling, done some things here and there, but really took off in Napier's first year with Anthony Richardson. So he found his yards per route run, and so 22 is the year with Richardson. You see it goes to a 2.42, but before that, pretty middling, like pretty, not too dissimilar to what J. Michael Sturdivant's had, right? So
different trajectory.
Yes, one is moving up, one is moving down. But so to me, I'm like, okay, that's what they want to do. If he's the take, he's kind of a Justin Shorter, who they think, okay, with what we do, with people going to load the box, he can just be a shot vertical guy down the field, and he's a big, tall body that can run a 10-4, 900 meters. Lagway, J. Michael Sturdivant's down there somewhere, throw it up. Like, it's one of those type of deals.
A deep cross from him is just brutal.
Yeah, so that's the role. Now, I think where I'm definitely agreeing with you for sure. Like, I guess our disagreement would be I see a role. I don't think you even would disagree that maybe there's a role there. But I definitely agree with you. This is not an elite number one receiver.
Yeah.
Like, if he's elite number one receiver, he looks a little different on film, and his numbers are better, right? Because, you look at some of those guys, you're like, oh, well, those are really good numbers. I wonder why they weren't real high-level recruits. Okay, well, they probably don't have the physical traits. Well, so when a guy that has the physical traits has low numbers, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, a problem, a couple other red flags, like Justin Shorter, small sample size guy, like 2019, that's a crowded room. He's not getting many routes. He's probably playing second string. Because first year Emory Jones in an offense that really struggled. That was kind of his chance to break out 2021. Had a really bad year. But even then, he's not running. I think that's his only year where he breaks 300 routes.
Yeah, he was not playing a ton before.
Yeah, so, Shorter, you had some sample size, but probably 500 routes total before Napier got there. Sturdivant, we have 1,200 routes. And, he's got 1 year of eligibility left. He's played 4 years. If he's never been a really productive person, despite getting 300, 400 routes a year for 3 or 4 different offenses, that's a red flag. Like, you can't be the number one route runner for your team and be number 5 in yards, number 5 in targets.
Yeah.
Like, the routes where he's running and nobody's throwing it to him, those aren't going to pop up with the highlight reel. And there's a lot of those on tape.
And I think that to like a couple of things. One, just in terms of talking about guys' roles and how that can affect it. In terms of just like Shorter, like your quarterback, all the context doesn't matter. DK was another one where, like, contextually, you look at the 2023, he was hurt, but then you also go back and look at it. He went from playing slot almost exclusively in 2022 to being put out wide in a new offense in 2023. Well, so in Florida, he's going to play slot. So the 22 numbers, because I think there were some people that was, oh, you're cherry picking this yards route run because you said DK, why'd you pick his good year, not his bad year? Well, because Florida was recruiting him to play slot. He played slot in 22, where he had a great season. 23, they moved him almost exclusively out wide. He wasn't suited for that. He had a bad year and he got hurt, right?
Yeah.
Sturdivant's been a guy that they like throw screens to. They're trying to get the ball in his hands. It's, I think
people tried and struggled to make it work.
I think that he has, but I would say on this team he would have a role. But I think if you could get like a real big time like X, because I think he'd be playing the X. I believe that's where Shorter played. But if you can get a guy that can do it all there, like that's where you can pay. You need a big like Badger. I would pay. Just kind of look at the difference between those two. And Badger wasn't even like elite of the elite,
right?
But he had great production. So that's kind of like,
and changed our. Me and you were talking, and we were pretty down heading in this year until we got Badger, and we were like, okay, now we have 3 pieces on offense.
Yeah, that helps.
Now we can think about a second-year Graham Mertz taking a step forward, which didn't happen, but luckily, our only elite commit turned out to hit and have elite value, so it didn't matter. But yeah, I think my hope is that we're kind of letting the Pyburns and the Searcies of the world walk, and rather than overpaying them, we do have some funds for the portal, and more guys are going to hit the portal. There was also a spring portal period, which is where we got Badger, and there will be chances to get guys that really fill in the gaps on this team. I think we need a wide receiver. I want to pay $600K for one. I want a really good one. 2 years eligibility to go with Lagway. I want a CB1. We need a really good cornerback. I look at our roster. Bridges played lights out, and if you don't have that, I think this defense, man, it could have been rough. I look at, we got Moore and Johnson. Both Moore has never stayed healthy. Johnson's okay. And then after that, you're looking at Cormani or high school guys. That is way too valuable a position at that you need way more than 6 bodies at. We need a CB1. I need those 2 guys taken care of today, tomorrow. Go pay top dollar for them. So I'm hoping we're letting the Pyburns and the Searcies of the world walk so that we can fill those gaps. Not with the J. Michael Sturdivants, but with somebody a little bit better. So,
just for reference, here's the Elijah Badger yards per route run. Just in terms of, I think maybe if he went in the portal now, he might be a guy that's commanded high top dollar, but he didn't. I don't think last year. I mean, he was wanted, but his first year he didn't play very much. 0.8 yards per route run, and then 22 he was 2.27. 2023 when he was injured as well, he was 2. This year at Florida, 3.32 yards per route run. So that's what you're looking for, and that's what you pay for, especially if you have. I think both are concerned here. If you're a Florida fan, is despite the uncertain landscape or whatever, one thing is not certain, but it seems like you've got a really good quarterback.
Yes,
that's going to be around for probably 2 more years if he continues to develop and hit kind of his ceiling. So, are you waiting for his junior year? What if he gets hurt?
You only have 2 years to get this right.
You got a 2-year window. Take advantage of both years. Don't wait until the junior year. Try to go all in. And then, what if somebody gets hurt? And then you've gone all in for what? When you could have just done it the second year. And I also think this is kind of the other thing that we talked about kind of at the beginning of Napier's tenure. We've continued to talk about it, and you've talked about it a bunch. Like, you should have overpaid at the beginning. Yeah. Been willing to overpay. Because we've seen right here, once you have some success, it seems to get a little bit easier, right? Florida had a great end of the year. They flipped a ton of kids, right? Now, I'm sure they didn't just flip out of the goodness of their heart, but like the success on the field was really helpful and feeling about where you're going to spend your future. So pay now. And guess what? If you pay early, it'll be cheaper later. Like Saban got a lot of discounts. You're not Saban, but if you're winning, guys will be willing to take a little bit less for a chance to win a championship.
Yep. I mean, I don't think Georgia pays the value on a lot of their guys. And
no, and
they managed to field a roster that makes the college football playoffs, and people still give them a pretty good playoff shot, even with a hurt quarterback. I mean, if you win, if you can get to that upper tier, things get easier.
You've got to the pain. It's going to hurt one way or the other. You got to pay now. You got to pay later.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's probably a big fear that that Florida's, and I think there was I can't remember. I think it might have been Astute Alligator on Twitter, who's a good follow. I think he may have been talking about it. There was a story that came out about how teams are front loading NIL contracts because they're trying to get ahead of any type of potential legislation, right?
Yep.
And that there are some teams that are doing this, front loading the contracts, getting guys paying a lot now, and there's other teams that are just acting right now like there's already a salary cap.
Yep.
And his thought was Florida's probably acting like a team that there's already a salary cap instead of kind of trying to get out in front and get as much value as you can. Here, they're already kind of like, all right, well, this is what it's going to be, so let's go ahead and start preparing for it. That's the kind of, I think that's the frustrating part, I think, for a lot of fans, is you have some momentum and you've got to maintain it in this day and age, because if you don't, it's just like the old coaching adage. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse. That's what, if you're not giving the fans positive news, you're giving them negative news, and a lot of times. So yeah, it was a small reprieve, but hopefully Florida goes out, has a great performance in the Gasparilla Bowl, which we previewed earlier in this show. And then the big names start hitting the portal, and Florida's just been saving the money to go out and spend it on some elite guys. So
we'll see. I think Florida had a good portal cycle last year. I am pretty optimistic. The guys who are coming back are good, like getting Slaughter back, getting Banks back. Those are those NFL quality guys that –
I think Barber announced today he's back as well. So you're going to have 4 of your 5, right?
Those are, Barber and George are more fringe NFL quality guys, but trench guys, SEC quality trench guys, tough to replace them. There's value there. So that stuff makes me feel a little bit good that we're not going to waste a year at Lagway. And with how well the portal went, and then letting guys like Pyburn and Searcy walk, I think I am willing to be a little bit more optimistic that the portal works out in Florida's favor. That's my optimism. My pessimism is Florida doesn't have a GM, and I think we probably have an outdated model for paying players. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm willing to, because I think this is the other part. Like, these teams have a lot more information than we do in terms of knowing who's going to enter the portal. I think there are some surprises, but these guys are tampering. These guys have agents. They're talking to agents. They have a pretty good idea of who may be coming down the line. So maybe they're keeping the powder dry for a big name that fits exactly what they wanted, X. And Sturdivant is a third guy, and perfect. So I'm willing to kind of wait and see. But I think for a lot of people, if you don't do much coming up here, it's going to turn. Like you've had some positive momentum. It's going to turn back, because it does feel like, you've got a little window here. You got a chance to kind of make a move. And if you don't kind of improve in those certain spots, it could, that's where I think people will get a little antsy going into next year. So, but I don't think there's too much more. We talked about the Gasparilla Bowl. Florida plays on Friday. Should be a fun game to watch. Hopefully, a lot of the Tampa locals are heading out to the game. Should be a good time, I'm sure. And I think it's wait and see on the portal. What's crazy is wait and see on the portal, and then that's basically means kind of wait and see on the recruiting as well. Because after recruiting, both you and I were kind of like, good close. I think you got to wait and see what they do in the portal before you can say if it was a really good kind of talent acquisition season or not. So a lot's kind of riding on, how they finish here. So we'll see. But regardless, we'll be back. Maybe we'll be back after the portal season. I don't know. We'll have to talk through it.
Yeah. Comment section. Let me know. I'm curious. Who are the 10 Gators you would pay on the roster right now? You don't have to pay them those amounts. Who are the 10 guys that Florida has to pay these guys? I think if people comment that, we're going to see a lot of the same names,
and
which is fine.
Probably good. Yeah, it's not a bad thing. Leave us. Who would you pay? Who are the top 10 guys you would pay to keep? So if you had to pay out and could only keep 10 for sure, who would those guys be? Let us know in the comments. I'm not sure if we'll be back during just given the time of the game, an afternoon game on what is still a work day. We may be back for a halftime post game. I'm not positive yet, but if we are, we'll announce it on Twitter. We'll go live there on Twitter and on YouTube, Twitter X, whatever you want to call it. We'll be there live. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, share the channel, and leave a comment. Let us know if we need to do anything different. If you're enjoying the show, we got some nice comments from Gmail, CGS, and Kent King tonight. Thank you guys for watching. Go Gators.
Go Gators.